By the morning of December 12th, 2009, Stephen Koecher was hundreds of miles into a series of movements that investigators would later examine in extraordinary detail. At the time, nobody knew that this day would become the center of one of Nevada's most enduring mysteries. To Stephen, it may have seemed like any other day, but for detectives, who would later reconstruct his final known hours, nearly every minute would become important. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they determined that Stephen had been traveling through southern Nevada before eventually making his way toward Henderson. For those unfamiliar with the area, Henderson sits directly southeast of Las Vegas. Today, the city is known for quiet residential neighborhoods, parks, shopping centers, and master-planned communities. It's not the type of place many people associate with mystery. In fact, that ordinary setting is one of the reasons this case remains so unsettling. When people imagine disappearances, they often picture isolated highways, dense forests, or dangerous urban environments. Stephen's disappearance happened in broad daylight, in a suburban neighborhood where people were walking dogs, checking mailboxes, and going about their daily routines. That reality has never stopped feeling strange. Because somewhere within that ordinary environment, Stephen's trail ended, and nobody has been able to explain exactly where. Investigators eventually confirmed that Stephen entered the Henderson area during the late morning hours. At first, his movements seemed deliberate. Surveillance footage and later analysis suggested he wasn't simply passing through. He appeared to be navigating toward a destination. One of the questions detectives immediately asked was whether Stephen had ever visited this neighborhood before. If he had, it might explain why he appeared comfortable driving through the area. If he hadn't, it might suggest someone provided directions. Unfortunately, definitive answers proved difficult to establish. That investigators did know that Stephen didn't randomly stop on the first street he encountered. Instead, he drove through the neighborhood in a way that suggested he was looking for something specific. Some investigators would later compare behavior to someone searching for a particular address. Not lost, not wandering, but searching. That distinction became important because it implied purpose, and purpose implies a reason. The challenge was figuring out what that reason might have been. Before we continue, it's worth spending a moment describing the neighborhood itself. Many true crime cases become easier to understand when we visualize the setting. The area where Stephen parked was quiet, residential, orderly. The streets curved through rows of homes. Landscaping was well maintained. There was very little about the neighborhood that would draw attention, which ironically may be exactly why the case became so difficult. In a crowded urban area, people can disappear into chaos. In an isolated wilderness, nature can hide evidence. But in a suburban neighborhood, people generally notice things. Neighbors observe unfamiliar vehicles. Residents recognize unusual activity. Someone walking through the area tends to stand out, especially if they don't live there. This reality initially gave investigators some hope. Surely somebody had seen something, remembered a detail, or knew where Stephen went. But as the investigation progressed, detectives discovered a frustrating truth. People remembered seeing him, but nobody knew what happened to him next. One reason Stephen Koecher's disappearance remains so well known is because of surveillance footage captured that day. Investigators reviewed it repeatedly. News organizations aired portions of it. Online communities analyzed every movement. And for years, viewers have studied the footage, searching for clues. The recordings show Stephen driving through the neighborhood, making turns, passing homes. navigating residential streets. At one point, he appears to circle through the area. This detail attracted attention. Was he looking for a particular house? Trying to locate a meeting place? Making sure he wasn't being followed. Investigators considered all of those possibilities, but ultimately, the footage could only reveal behavior, not motive. And behavior without context can be difficult to interpret. But one thing still stood out. Stephen did not appear confused. He wasn't asking for directions. He wasn't pulling over repeatedly. He didn't seem lost. He appeared focused. And that observance would be the influence to investigate theories for years. Eventually, Stephen parked his vehicle. This seemingly simple decision became one of the most analyzed aspects of the case. Why did he park there? Why not closer to where he was going? Why leave the vehicle on that particular street? Investigators considered multiple possibilities. Perhaps he expected a short walk, or someone instructed him where to park, or he planned to return quickly, or the location itself held significance. But no answer emerged. The parking location generated questions, but provided very few conclusions. What detectives did know was that Stephen intentionally left his vehicle, and what happened next would be one of the most famous moments in the case. The surveillance footage shows Stephen exiting the vehicle. He closes the door, begins walking, and his pace appears steady, relaxed, and purposeful. That detail is important because many investigators noted that Stephen did not appear distressed, frightened, or looking for help. He didn't behave like someone who believes they were in danger. Instead, he appeared to be heading somewhere, and that observation has fueled endless discussions. If Stephen was walking towards a destination, where was it? A residence, a meeting, a job opportunity, somebody he knew, someone he met? The possibilities seem endless, but yet none have been conclusively proven. Stephen continues walking. He eventually disappears from the camera view, and those are the last confirmed images of him. A few ordinary moments, a short walk, and then the mystery begins. There's something uniquely disturbing about footage like this. In many disappearances, viewers can identify a moment when danger appears, a suspicious vehicle, confrontation, or visible threat. Stephen's footage contains none of those things. Everything looks normal. And that's precisely why it lingers in people's minds, because the video creates the impression that whatever happened next occurred completely outside of public view. The camera records an ordinary scene, but somewhere beyond the edge of that frame, something changed. And the question is what? As the detectives canvassed the neighborhood, they began identifying people who remembered seeing Stephen. Several witnesses provided accounts that generally matched his appearance and movements. One resident recalled seeing a man walking through the neighborhood who appeared unfamiliar. Another remembered noticing someone who looked as though he might be searching for an address. Others described him as calm and composed, and the consistency of these descriptions mattered. Witnesses weren't describing panic or confusion or describing someone running from danger. They were describing a man who appeared to have a purpose. For investigators, that suggested Stephen likely expected to be in the area, which raised an important question. If he expected to be there, why? Some witnesses later said Stephen looked like a salesman. At first glance, the detail might not seem particularly important, but investigators paid attention to it. Why? Because people walking through neighborhoods sometimes have a reason to knock on doors. Sales representatives, service providers, job seekers, or individuals following up on business opportunities. Could Stephen have been meeting someone regarding work? Remember, he had been searching for employment. Investigators considered whether he might have traveled to Henderson because of a business opportunity. Perhaps he expected to meet a potential employer, or arranged a conversation, or believed an opportunity awaited him. But the theory only seemed plausible, but proving it was another matter entirely. As detectives continued investigating, they found more possibilities, not certainty. One of the most labor-intensive aspects of the case involved door-to-door interviews. Detectives visited homes throughout the neighborhood, and residents were asked whether they remembered seeing him, whether they had security cameras, saw unusual vehicles, whether anyone unfamiliar had visited the area that day. These interviews generated information, but not the breakthrough investigators hoped for. Most accounts confirmed only a limited picture. Yes, Stephen had been there. Yes, people remembered him. But they didn't know where he went afterward. Imagine how frustrating that must have been. The mystery wasn't hidden in a distant location. It existed within a neighborhood full of potential witnesses, and crucial moments remained invisible. As witness accounts accumulated, investigators increasingly considered the possibility that Stephen had gone to Henderson to meet someone. Several factors supported this idea. His movements were deliberate, his behavior appeared competent, and the location itself seemed unlikely to be random. People generally don't drive long distances to wander through residential neighborhoods without a reason, especially when they park and continue on foot. Detectives wanted to know whether Stephen had arranged a meeting. If so, with whom and why? Unfortunately, answering those questions proved remarkably difficult, because investigators could see evidence suggesting a purpose. They could not clearly identify the purpose itself. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation involved determining what happened after Stephen vanished from view. Without surveillance footage, without eyewitness confirmation, without direct evidence, detectives were forced to work backward. They examined timelines, phone activity, financial records, vehicle locations, and every available clue. The goal was to identify any event that might reveal Stephen's movements after the last sighting. But the further investigators pushed into those missing hours, the less certain things became. The timeline seemed to dissolve, and when timelines dissolve, mysteries grow. Eventually, investigators located Stephen's vehicle. The discovery represented both progress and frustration. On one hand, the vehicle confirmed where the disappearance began, but the other, it failed to explain what happened afterward. The car contained no obvious evidence of violence, no clear indication of a struggle, no immediate signs of criminal activity. This absence of evidence created a problem. If Stephen encountered foul play, where did it occur? If he left voluntarily, why did he abandon his vehicle? If someone met him, where did they go? Again and again, investigators returned to the same questions, and again, definitive answers remained out of reach. At this stage in the investigation, detectives knew Stephen arrived in Henderson. They knew he intentionally parked his vehicle. They knew witnesses saw him walking through the neighborhood. And they knew he disappeared shortly afterward. What they did not know was who he was meeting, where he intended to go, or what happened once he moved beyond the reach of surveillance cameras. The mystery was growing deeper, and the next phase of the investigation would introduce even more questions. Because detectives were about to begin examining Stephen's phone records, financial activity, and personal communications. And some of those discoveries would become the most debated aspects of the entire case. Some stories don't ask to be remembered. They wait. If you're still here, it's already too late. This has been Diamonds After Dark. See you next time.